Well, let's go ahead and get rolling. We made it. We're almost 9:30. We're week 5 of the parenting littles class, and thanks for you all that are here back again. I know it's been in and out, and that's okay. It's summertime and it's crazy, and um, I'm going to go ahead and go through everything, even as we've had these small weeks, because I know there's quite a few folks that are watching online when it comes out. Um, Last week won't be posted online. We had a small class, but the next 2 weeks, well, today will, and I don't know about next week. I'm looking forward to next week. So today and for week 6, a lot of what we're going to talk about, I'm going to say, is just non-convictional. Like we're going to talk about some principles. We're going to talk about a lot of things that have worked in our house that, again, are kind of non-convictional things. It worked for us, but just kind of practically how it plays out for us in our house. And then next week, I'm pumped about because Mel and Chris Brewer are going to come in. And we're just going to have a really informal Q&A. Like Mel and Chris, obviously, I think they offer a very different perspective for us because their kids are now out of the house. And then also, they both served in kids ministry for what? How long? 7, 8 years? 9 years? Long time in kids ministry at Buck Run. So I think it's a great perspective to hear from them just about how they see parenting's change, things that they're really glad that they did, things that they maybe emphasized and are like, yeah, I wish we hadn't emphasized that as much. So super pumped to have them here next week. If you do watch online, then I encourage you to come see that one in person because I know Heather and I are excited to ask them questions. And we'll sit up here too, and it'll just be a little more informal. Let's just talk about parenting and where things are going and any specific issues that we've all had. This morning, what we're going to do is we're going to first do a minor recap of some of what we covered last week. And then we're going to just kind of dive into a few random topics and how some things play out in our house. And if we get time at the end of class, just throw it open for discussion and hear some of the things that you all have done. So for last week, a lot of the discussion last week was on discipline and an emphasis on, okay, how do we discipline and correct our kids? What does that look like? And discussing discipline that humbles and not humiliates. So in the action of doing that we're not, with the reasoning behind it is a teaching and a correction and not just a punishment aspect to our parenting. And when we talk about the discipline moment, we talked about the fact that we weave in kind of 2 pieces of it. One, a consequence and correction with a communication piece. And communication with our kids, I think, is kind of a funny thing to talk about because if I ask you, like, all right, what does it mean for 2 friends to communicate? You're probably going to say something along the lines of, well, there's one talking and one listening, and then you switch. The other one talks and the other one listens. And I feel like, for me anyway, I know I have this struggle, and I'm presuming many of us do, that when we deal with our kids and we think about communication, sometimes we fall into this trap of making it one way. That like communication is me telling you what you need to do. And if we're not careful, we fall into that, especially in our discipline moments where we can treat discipline more like our venting session than we do communication and listening to our kids. And so in that communication and the discipline and the correction, it offers us a chance to reflect back and listen and see the world through their eyes. And as we've talked about all these parenting concepts, in many ways it reflects the way that the Lord deals with us, right? Like in the discipline, in the correction moments, asking questions and getting down to the root of their heart and what the challenge is, lets us see it through their eyes and how they're seeing the world and what they're struggling with. And I love thinking back, the scripture we turned to was Hebrews 4, and in particular to pull out verse 15. And in Hebrews, the author is talking about Jesus as our great high priest. And it says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." The fact that Jesus, acting as our high priest, came down to earth, faced temptation like we did, and saw things through our eyes. And so in our correction with our kids, that we need to take time to communicate two ways. First, to talk to them, but also to listen and see what it is they're dealing with. So we talked a lot last week about asking questions to get to the root of what's going on in their heart, to diagnose the challenge they're in. And you play this out in the scenario with them, and think about like hitting a sibling. And if you say, hey, why did you hit your brother? You're probably not going to get much of a response. You're going to get, well, I don't know. Well, why? So why questions don't always work, but maybe asking different questions like, okay, what did your sibling do to make you mad? And to hear and listen back like, okay, you were mad because they took a toy. All right? Well, maybe you're right. Maybe they shouldn't have taken that toy from you. And I understand being frustrated and angry about that. But what do you think a better reaction than hitting them would have been? And talking through and letting them reiterate back to you maybe what a wiser choice would have been in that moment. And so that communication allows you to see where they are and to have them have the opportunity to talk back to you and tell you, hey, the next time that plays out, this is a better reaction to it. And for us at our house, we talked about what obedience looks like and being clear with especially our little kids at a young age, that obedience is obeying without challenge, without excuse, and without delay. And sometimes we hear that sounds really harsh, but I also think of the opposite. Like if you don't expect obedience to be immediate with them, like you kind of wind up with a couple scenarios where you have to escalate for them to obey, like either you resort to like, okay, if I ask you to do this and you didn't do it and I ask you 3 times and the 4th time I'm yelling, or I'm going to count to 3 and then you're going to do it. And in doing that, kind of they learn that, hey, mom and dad aren't serious until they're yelling or counting. So for us, we laid out in our house like, okay, obedience is an immediate thing and you do it without protest or fight. But at the same time, that doesn't mean there's no opportunity for appeal to say like, hey, if I tell you, like, go get your pajamas on and go to bed, like while you're immediately in the act of going to do what I ask you to do, you may certainly say, hey, Dad, like, I took a nap in the car this afternoon. Can I stay up late and read in my bed? And so the opportunity for appeal is important in that instruction and in obedience, so that you don't get angry and it's just not authoritarian. But it is okay to have the high expectation and look for obedience, or look for appeal while they're in the act of obeying. And we also reiterated a lot over the past few weeks this piece about consistency, being consistent in a response, so that our kids know, and whatever they know when they have a behavior or they know when they've disobeyed, that consequence or that reaction is consistent for us. And I mentioned this week using a lot of examples, and I think in our house specifically, like throwing fits was something that early on Heather and I talked about and said, like, that's one thing that we're going to immediately make sure that we're consistent with our response, like every time that happens. So from a young age, with our kids, they knew very quickly, like, and we had the same conversation every single time. If you throw a fit, 2 things will happen. Like, one, whatever you threw the fit over, whatever you wanted will not happen. So like if sibling took a toy and you got mad and screamed over it, like even if you were in the right to be upset about the toy, like you're not going to get it because of your reaction. And 2, also weaving in discipline and consequence with that, like, and when we did that consistently, like every time, the fits at a young age for our kids evaporated pretty quickly, because they knew every single time, if I do that, this is going to be what happens afterwards, and directly seeing the consequences of that. And it's a reminder for us that, when whatever our kids do, if they're doing a behavior or having an action or a wrong heart motive and it works and it gets what they want, then they're going to keep doing it, right? Like if throwing a fit gets you what you want, then our kids keep doing it. And we see that sometimes with kids who get much, much older. They've carried that out. Like, hey, if I scream, throw a fit, yell, like eventually mom and dad give in. So, that's how for us that consistency piece plays in, so that they know if this is the action, then this is what will happen every single time. And so we talk about the first piece, this communication aspect, this understanding and asking why, and also the importance of the consequence with the communication. And culturally, I think we hear a lot about dropping the consequence part of the discipline conversation of like, hey, have the conversation, but don't be overly harsh with your correction. And I think the danger in that is that we might miss that actions have consequences. We want to teach our kids that, hey, sin has consequences. That's the jump we're making to. We talked in week 3 about having our kids working with them on right actions before they understand right motives. Like teaching about apologizing before they really even know what that means. Like seeing those actions before the motives come behind it. And similarly, like we're teaching in our discipline and our correction that what you do has consequences. And when they're little, those consequences are small to us, but they're big to them. But it's setting up the broader conversation, right? Like as you get older, what you do has a consequence with it. So again, does it play out in the real young kids? In small ways. You think about, okay, go back to the hitting example. Like, hey, you hit your brother. Talk through in the conversation, what is the consequence of that? Like, okay, you were angry and you hit them, so what's the consequence? Well, 1, you're going to get a discipline from mom and dad. Like every time that happens out of anger, that's going to happen. But 2, consequence is you hurt your brother. Like your consequence of your sin isn't for just you. Like there's consequences playing out elsewhere. Like you hurt your brother. And then 3, not only did you physically hurt him, like it caused some fracturing in that relationship. Like then you're angry at each other. So what you do, it matters. And the reason for that is not just displaying those consequences and getting right behavior, but hitting at the motive. And at the end of the day, you're setting them up for the gospel conversation of like, look, the wages of sin is death. For us, for you, sin has consequences that are real and play out in your life, and they have ultimate consequences. And when we sin, we're not just sinning against ourselves and against each other, we're sinning against God in disobedience. And so the next step is that further conversation about the gospel. Applying for little hearts and big hearts. And of course, we model after that discipline and after the correction, the restoration, right? The restoration and forgiveness. And hey, mom and dad aren't angry in this correction. Like it is our job, it is what God has called us to discipline you, to correct you, to teach you. We're not angry about that. We don't hold it against you. But having moments of restoration. And in the communication piece, today we'll transition to talking about the practical piece of how this plays out. And for us, Heather and I, one of the things that we try to do is just strategize about the things that our kids are struggling with. Like, as you see, and especially for you all with older parents, you've seen this play out even more, like to think about each kid struggles with different things in different ways. And as they grow and as we look to parent for the long term, to strategize together about, hey, how do we need to adjust our parenting? How do we need to adjust our teaching with what they struggle with? Real examples for us, like we have one that struggles a whole lot with like bodily self-control. Like even as they've gotten way older, they're just out of control with their body most of the time. So it's a frequent topic of conversation, and not in a bad way, but like, hey, you're wild, and that can be a helpful thing at certain times. Like that energy that you have is a good thing, but we've got to work on how you have some control over that energy. So for us, we realize that we have to set aside places and times in our life and in our house for that kid to go wide open. Like, we have to talk about, like, I'm glad you guys were having an intense sword fight. It appears you tried to literally chop off your brother's head. Like, they're just these different struggles that they have. So we find out, like, okay, what can we do? I know you're going to climb the walls of our house. So here's an area of the house where you can climb and go wild. Like, here's your spot. But we talk through it openly. We have another kid that's complete opposite. Like, their bodily self-control is fine. Like, they're just going to sit there. They'd be fine. And they're like, I joke that one of our kids was born an old man. Like, he just chill and whatever. I remember specifically, like, taking him to the doctor once. And, he was like 4. And the nurse is like, do we need to hold him down for a shot? And he looks at the nurse like, you're not giving me a shot. Like, 4 years old, there's no like fit or crying. He was just like, no. Like, and so different kid. It's not a bodily struggle. It's just it's more of an attitude struggle. And for that one, it was negativity. So we talk a lot about negativity and how, hey, like, you went to the water park today and you did 100 fun things, but as we get in the car to ride home, like, you're upset because you only got to ride the slide 3 times. Like, you chose that you got to do 100 cool things. You're focusing on one thing that you didn't get to do. And so, like, what does that mean for you? And we talk about, okay, that's fostering a heart of like discontent. Like, you are choosing to feel like you have been wronged because of this. And that's setting you up for a struggle later in life. So, for us, it's been a constant, like, okay, these 3 creatures are all different. They all struggle with different things. Like, how do we work together to talk them through whatever their specific challenge is and strategize through that? I'll share another thing that we do that's worked well for us. Is communication, like in front of groups or when there's a lot of people around. I realized that a lot of times, like, every time I called a kid over to me when we were in a group, that it was usually like correction. And I thought, you know what, like, this can't be the way that they always see me, as like, hey, every time Dad calls me over, that means I'm in trouble. So it was a change for me in saying, okay, like, I need to think about my communication with the kids as being rich and full spectrum, not always in punishment, correction, or discipline. Like, it has to be much more than that. So one of the things that worked for us is when we're out with people, I'll call one of them over to me a lot for something else. It's like, hey, I saw that you did that. I really appreciate your servant's heart in going to take out the trash when nobody asked you to, and when we had people over. Or we're saying, hey, man, I just like you. Like, you're funny. That joke you made was funny. Anything, but just to expand that communication with our kids so that it's not a moment of just correction. And then when the correction happens, that I can do it quietly to the side and not in a humiliating way and call them out in front of everybody. Because if I call them over, they don't know. They don't know for sure what's coming. Like, say, hey, you know that that's unacceptable. You know that that's not all right. We'll talk about it more later, or like, this is your chance to fix it. We've got people over for another hour. Like, I want to see this improve over the next hour. So to keep that communication broad. This is another mantra we've heard from Buck Run parents for a long time that I love, is like, set our kids up for success. Like, set them up for success in what we do and how we do it. Those of you who know me pretty well know that, like, I love fishing. I'll confess on camera and on mic, you probably don't know how much I like fishing. But a lot of times I'm busy during the day, so I'll every year, at least a couple times a year, at like 10 o'clock at night, I'll drive to Lake Cumberland and I'll fish till 4 or 5 in the morning, and then I drive home and I lay and sleep on the floor in the bedroom for like an hour because I know if I get in the bed, I won't get up. And then I wake up and go on to work. And I remember one time, like a few years ago, doing that in specific, and it was a day when I had a really challenging meeting in the morning. And I fished all night long, had like donuts and Red Bull going into work for a really challenging meeting. And what would you say to that? Be like, that's stupid. Like, that is not a wise decision. That meeting did not go well. Shocker, right? And when we say it for ourselves, it's an easy assessment. Like, yeah, that was not wise. But think about it in terms of in the way that we handle our kids and the way we set them up for success. They need more sleep than us. They need good food to be fed well. And if we have a schedule that is jam-packed from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. one day, and we wear them out and they're tired, like expecting perfect behavior out of them is probably not going to happen. So it's incumbent upon us to put some thought into how we set them up for success. And that goes for not just like behavior, that goes for like school, right? Like, obviously, if you're taxing your kids on a heavy weekend and then turning them loose in school, like, is that setting them up for success? It might be challenging. And it's funny because we'd probably all articulate that easily and say, like, yeah, we know that to be true. But sometimes it slips our mind when we're going through crazy schedules. And I mean, we have some family that I can think of in particular, and I remember they think our kids are like crazy hooligans. And what's funny about it to me is that, like, at our house, our kids are like 98% water drinkers. Like, we don't hardly have anything else for them. We're not, just by choice, like candy is not a super frequent thing, like every few days. And they go over to this family member's house and they'll give them what like everybody else has for that side of the family. They'll give them like soda and a bunch of candy, and then the kids are literally climbing the walls. And you're like, look, like, my kid never has caffeine or sugar, and you just gave them 40 milligrams of caffeine and 2 tablespoons of sugar. Like, you get what you deserve. Like, I'm okay. I don't stand on that on principle, but it's just an acknowledgement that, like, hey, when we load our kids up like that, we push them that way, like, we shouldn't be necessarily surprised at the result. And look, I'm not saying I'm anti any of that stuff. It's just an acknowledgement. Like, there are things that we as parents think about, especially when they're little, and they're going to experiment with sugar and caffeine when they get in their teenage years, no matter what we do. But it's worth thinking about. We also have that in kind of physical play at our house, is like the value of them having space, time to physically like go all out and wear out. And I've joked about this a lot, and don't take it the wrong way, but like I remember particularly when we lived in Tierra Linda in town, like if we had C group a lot on Sunday nights, we would be like, all right, kids, like people are coming over in a half hour, like go outside and run some laps around the house. And they would, I think Parker's record was like 45 laps around the house before a C group. And again, that's not a punishment. It's just like, it became fun to them. I would time them or whatever, but there was a value for us in recognizing that they needed physical time to like go out and exercise. Are we the only crazy people that do that, or any else have like, what do y'all do to burn the energy at your house? Rock climbing wall. I love it. I love it. There's a wall. Climb the wall. Climb the wall. What else? What else you guys do? Library. Go to that place in town designated as the quiet zone and annoy whoever you want. I'm just kidding. We do. Obviously, we're there all the time. But no, I love that. But getting out, library is a free place, right? Like, take your kids to the library. They have a play center in the library now. It's weird, but
We pull the couch cushions on the floor, and Ellis just loves to like jump from cushion to cushion. He's like, "It's my favorite thing. My parents not home." I'm like, "That's right. We just have to clean up the toys first." And then he's like, "Yes, let's do it."
yeah. We found that like you can play like 30 seconds of American Ninja Warrior on the TV, and then our kids try to replicate it anywhere that they are. But yeah, like there's value in that, and there's value in just for us we worked with distinguishing like the time and the place for the burning energy. Like, hey, there's a time for going all out. Here's a place that we're making sure is available for you to go all out. So go all out and enjoy it and burn a little energy. And, obviously, like their behavior is still up to them. But there's a lot that we can do as parents to structure some things into our day and make sure that they have time to burn the energy that they can. And I think it's a challenge, another piece that's a challenge for all of us these days, especially in the social media lives that we live, is to look on social media at the highlight reel of everyone's lives and wind up way over scheduling. Like we're looking at this highlight reel and they're like, they're at the family barbecue tonight, they're on the boat somehow the same day that they also had a baseball tournament. Like you looking at other people's pictures and seeing them go here and there and everywhere else and thinking, like, we need to be out doing more. We need to be out like going to event to do this or that more than we are. And I think that overscheduling can be a huge burden on us being effective parents. Like, because if we are constantly rushing from one thing to the next, we can wind up missing out on the little moments in between. That overscheduling can rob us of some of the most precious moments that are sitting right in front of us. And I know we all feel the pressure from here to there when we look and see what others doing. But to me, I think it's one of the things that our kids can teach us the best, of the value in the unscripted moments. Like, I mean, how many times have you all given an awesome Christmas gift to your kid that you were pumped about, and like, especially when they're little, they like play with the box? Like there's all these ways to chill out and enjoy those moments. We had one about a week and a half ago. We went out and went fishing, and we have like a smaller boat, and there's 5 of us. So yeah, we went out to Taylorsville Lake, and one of the types of fishing we like to do is we call it noodle fishing, and you have like this little chunk of pool noodle, and you tie your line to one end of it and drop it down in the lake, and then like the pool noodle floats, and then your string's on this end, so if you get a fish, like the noodle pops straight up and is like in the air, and then it's swimming across the lake, and it's like a big bobber not attached to a fishing pole. And so we take the kids out and we go out to the lake and we throw like 30 of those out there. So, that's a lot. And we're sitting there like eating pizza, watching, and I look up on the horizon and I'm like, so did you look at the weather? Nope. Did you look at the weather? Nope. Because I'm about 90% sure that's a thunderstorm cloud like rolling right this way. And we look up. Luckily, the thunder and lightning didn't start it, but we just see the wall of rain coming. And we've got 30 of these bobbers floating out across the lake. And I'm like, well, there's no chance we're collecting those within the next 2 minutes. So we just pulled up under a tree, and we got soaked. And there's a moment where Heather and I looked at each other. We're like, all right, we have a decision at this point. Like, we can show the misery we feel right now, or we could just have fun and enjoy it. And as the rain is coming down in sheets, there are literally like waves rolling across the lake like this, and we can see our little pool noodles stand up, like the fish are on. And you know what? We wound up having an outstanding time, but it required of us like an attitude change and like a slowing down and like, look, we're going to have a awful mess to clean up when we get home in a few hours, but like enjoy the moment while it's here and enjoy it for what it is. And we had a great time. We caught a ton of fish. and avoided any lightning strikes. So all was well. But I mean, our kids teach us that so well. And with that, we'll dive into this piece of this class. And I know you might get the thinking from the first 4 weeks that like, hey, our kids are like sitting at home with their hands folded all the time, that we're really straight-laced. And I don't want to emphasize, it can feel heavy, the parenting task ahead of us of like thinking about shaping little lives and correcting and disciplining, and we can feel the weight of it and we can feel the stressful moments. But just to remember to have an awesome time along the way. There's not a high likelihood that the rest of our lives we're going to have this captive audience for discipleship like we do with our kids in our home right now. And there's so much value in just having fun and enjoying the relationship. And as I was prepping this, I couldn't help but thinking about the story of the Prodigal Son. And when the wayward son comes home and the son that stayed there on the farm is saying, Dad, why are we celebrating for the long lost brother? And the dad's like, you've been with me. And of course, it's the reflection for us, and we've had the talking point with our kids of walking through like, look, the value of us loving Jesus and being obedient to his word is not just about going to heaven one day. It's not just about this payoff at the end. Like, the love of the Lord is the joy of the relationship. And hey, there's going to be challenges. There's going to be teaching and correction in our relationship with our kids. But part of the biggest joy and the payoff of that hard work that you put in and having those conversations, in working through the discipline, is the joy of the relationship with our kids. And hey, when your kids are working on being well behaved, you just have a lot more fun. Like you do. You put in that hard work, you put in that consistency, and the payoff is great for the relationship in the short term and the long term. And I say that is how it's played out in our house. Like, we're crazy. Like we are crazy, and we have a crazy good time. But I've talked to my boys a lot. Like, hey, if I can trust you to listen to me where we go, we'll go some crazy places. I told you I like all-night fishing. I started, and we don't have like a little cabin boat you get in and hide. No, it's just like the first boat we fished in was like it was a 12-ounce soda can cut in half. But we'd go at 5 years old. Like, we would go fish all night long on the lake by ourselves. Like, hey, if I can trust you to listen to me without question in a moment when something goes wrong on the water or out, like, hey, we can do a lot more awesome stuff. A proud dad moment. Like, I'd say we go crazy. We have wrestling mats in our basement. I think 2 weeks ago, I almost got choked out before church the other morning. We set aside those times to just have a blast. Snake handling, I know we don't do that at church, so we make up for it at our house. It's a frequent part of the adventure and having fun. We laugh, but right, like we enjoy the time of life, and we don't want to walk through the parenting journey constantly being stressed and worried. Just kind of enjoy it, right? Like, have fun, make intentional memories. Adrian, I'm glad you're here for this, because seeing you reminds me, like, we make some intentional memories in our home. One of them is our cleanup song. Like, we have a super sweet clean up the house song. I met a guy in college, and he was a Christian musician, and it is an amazing song. And it is a 9-minute heavy metal ballad called Lay the Demon to Rest. And like, that's just one of the crazy things that we do, and the kids love it. They work a lot faster if they don't destroy things, but like, it's just one of those like small intentional things for us that I know that, hey, that's a strange thing. For most people, they're like, that is really weird. But it's something fun for us that we do at our house, and the kids like it, and it's a memory. And if they tell you that story, it'll make us seem like awful parents. But look for those little consistent ways to do that. And I know many of you do. So I'll just throw it open. Like, I enjoy the idea portion of this class, like hearing, like, what do you guys do to make intentional memories with your kids? What are some things you think, man, I hope the kids remember that we used to always do this? Yeah. No, that's all right. I think that's awesome. I love that. I'm gonna repeat it because I know there's a few watching, but just going hiking at a playground is what they did before visiting family. And I love that. It does a lot of things, right? It makes a memory, burns a little energy after sitting in the car all day. What else? What other intentional memories you guys do? Like, hey, I had a friend, they made pancakes every Sunday morning. They're like, hey, we're just, every Sunday, that's going to be Dad's thing. Like, Dad's going to make pancakes before church every single Sunday morning. Oh, that's awesome. I love it. Laying on the trampoline and looking at stars at night. I love it. I mean, that's a great point. There's so many ways to set up communication time. Like, hey, just chilling on the trampoline, looking at the stars is time to talk. That's super cool. We do that some on the boat, and it's like I told you, I struggle with slowing down and calming down. So, like, okay, if I fish in the night, like, I don't know why I'm still in the rush at 1 a.m. Like, just chill out, look at the stars, and leave some time open for communication. I love it. There's lots of easy ways for us to think about making those memories, and lots of free and easy things to do. And probably if you really sat back and thought about like a lot of your own childhood memories, I'm guessing it's a lot of the free, like, little things and in between moments that you had that you remember. Um, and it's important to sometimes just intentionally put those in. Like, what do we want our kids to remember of those times? And do we want them? Yeah, we want to know that mom and dad had high expectations, and that know that they did discipline us and correct us, and we respect them for that. But also to think about the many fun times, and we joke like our family is like the ultimate small group, right? Like, this is the place we're going to have fun together. We're going to mess up a lot. We're going to apologize. We're going to forgive each other, and we're going to work through things together and just enjoy it. With kind of that fun piece, Chris had a class, was it one cycle ago, about zeal without burnout, and just like living life without burning out, going hard without burning out, and much of that about a work and a rest cycle. And so that's another aspect for us that we've worked at in our house, is like, hey, how do we instill in our kids a work ethic and a rest ethic, right? Like, the world's going to tell them a lot of different things on that front, from academics to when they get into college and other people start teaching them. You're going to get the gamut from, like, hey, you need to be a hardcore workaholic, to you're not spending enough time on self-care. And like, either extreme goes too far. So thinking about our time with our kids and setting up clearly, like, hey, there's times to work and there's times to rest, and what that means, and how we model it. And we see this model throughout Scripture. From, Chris talked in his class about even before the fall in creation, that man had work to do and that there was a rest period. Jesus modeled it in his ministry with the apostles. And there's, you look in Mark 6, and the apostles came back to Jesus after they had gone and taught, and he was like, all right, come away and rest. So thinking about, all right, first off, assessing ourselves in that piece. Think about, how do we model rest in our week and in our life? Like, do our kids get to see that aspect of us where we have a time where we decompress and we chill out with them? And it goes a lot to, sleep for us and for them. Like, do we have healthy sleep habits to the best of our ability? Do we schedule that in for ourselves and also with them? I would share, for us, sleep with our kids was something that we had very strong views on, and this completely falls in the non-convictional category. But for us, like we worked really hard at an early age, like sleep training our kids, and fortunately, many of them all three of them that has stayed with them, and so that's not been a challenge for us. So I go to bed at the same time every night, and the benefit in that is that they get up early, but with that we've worked in for us like constructive things for them to do around sleep because they sleep well. Now that one gets older, we have, hey, you're going to be in your bed starting at 8 o'clock every night, but you can watch the clock and tell time, and you can read until this time, and then I should see your nightlight go out by this time, and you should be looking to go to sleep. And then in the mornings, like before they could tell time, we had a nightlight, and they have fancy versions of this, but since I'm cheap, I had a Christmas light timer on a light in their room that went off. Like, hey, you stay in your bed and you don't make noise until that light goes off, and then you can get up and get out of your bed. And when they got older, obviously, just regular old clock. But and there's great value in them learning that rest and work cycle. And for us in our house, that allowed a lot of flexibility. A lot of Sunday mornings now, for example, the boys will go ahead and get up and get dressed and sometimes brush their teeth before breakfast in their eagerness to get things done. But get up, get dressed, take the dog out, all things that they can do themselves, and to bring in, okay, that was your rest, now wake up, and you have some household things that are within your abilities to do. And then hitting on after you discuss openly the rest piece, the value of work. And that was another thing for us that we chose early on to just say, we don't want our kids to ever remember a time that they weren't working in the house. So like we don't ever want them to remember a time in their life that they didn't have expectations for helping or doing things. So it started out in little ways of like, your job is gonna be to clean up the table. Or, all right, you're not big enough to mow yet, but before Dad mows, you need to go pick up the sticks in the yard and take them out. Even the littlest ways that they can they could work with us or that they could work independently, and talking about like, hey, the joy and satisfaction of that. Like, hey, one day you're going to aspire to be a dad that just stares at the lawn after you cut it and be like, I cut that. I don't know if y'all have seen those memes, but they're everywhere about. But, seeing the value in like, hey, the joy and the value of working and what you get from that. And, I struggled a lot sometimes having a job that kept me busy a lot of the time, of realizing that I needed to more clearly communicate to my kids what I was doing and why. Like, hey, like I'm at work, and I'm at work for a couple reasons. Like one, so that we have a place to live. Like earning money is part of life, and it takes work to get there and do that. And as our kids have aged, that work piece has changed. And we talked about this a few weeks ago. Like, I think Jim Gaffigan makes a few jokes about it, but like, my dad always made time for me, took me to the post office, and he cracked all sorts of jokes about that. But I see a lot of value in that, in the little things, especially if you're outnumbered in your house like we are. We got three, like trying to always take at least one with us when we go somewhere. And surprisingly, now it's something they fight over. Like, who gets to go with mom or dad when we go to the post office or to the store or whatever. And the teaching moments that come with that, of talking about work and the value of them working on things, and also just the time spent with you and seeing the things that you do and the different roles that mom and dads have. And as we wrap up, I'll share one more story with you, and I'm glad the story happened while I was teaching this class, because it probably did help me with my attitude. But I try to take the boys with me to, like, if I'm fixing things around the house, or more accurately, if I'm attempting to fix things around the house. But about 4 weeks ago, we had a garage door quit working, and so I said, all right, Parker, let's try to figure this out. So I said, we took it off, like, let's look at it. And I tried to walk through with him, like, hey, look at it. And then let's look, let's do what every good repairman does, and let's go to YouTube. And so we went to YouTube, and I said, all right, tell me what's wrong with the garage door opener. And he very clearly found hey, that gear is broken. All right, let's buy a new gear. And the day we went to put that gear in, I was instilling all my vast knowledge to him on garage doors, and I managed to electrocute myself and then explode the new piece that we put in the garage door opener. And you probably listen to that story and go, that guy has no business working on anything. You would be right. But the point is, in those moments, hey, there's value in the successes and the nice stories we tell as much as the hard ones. I'm glad that parenting was on my mind in that moment to think hey, I should talk him through this. I messed up I was doing something I probably didn't have the ability to do. That's okay. You can try and learn things and we can mess up. But talking through hey, I was really angry when I got electrocuted, so you probably shouldn't laugh. And no, he didn't laugh. But he did go tell Mom very quickly because he couldn't keep that to himself. But there's value in even those crazy moments of having the conversation and communicating, talking through, and showing our kids just how to live life in a crazy, messed up world.